Well, hello everyone. I am back here with one brand new friend and an old friend, but two people who have quite in common with my work. So I can't wait to have this conversation today. Marianela Medrano from Palabra Counseling and Training Center. And today we are going to be talking about trauma. That this is my big hope that we're going to cover all this. We're going to be talking about trauma, resilience, creativity, and vulnerability. And I'm purposely putting vulnerability at the end because I see it as a holding plate. So I've been thinking and actually reading Alice Walker, Hard Times Require Furious Dancing. And I've been thinking that's kind of like as such a reminder of the importance of grace and elegance when dealing with the difficult, the unbearable, which is trauma. So I think that invitation that she extends to us and the poems, I don't know if you are familiar with this book, but if you are not, please read the poems here. And the dance that goes, the glorious dance that goes in between the lines here, reminding us how trauma is to be overcome through creative leaps and jumps. And I think that's what we do in poetry therapy, which is one of the things that unites me in a way to the two guests here, because we go to the kind of the hard, wrenching episodes or sad things that happen to us, and we transform them with the writing. We transform that into resolutions and commitment to create a new narrative. So we're gonna be talking about that, but I'm gonna tell you who are these beautiful two people who are here with me. We have Anjana Deshpande, and Anjana is a therapist, a published author, and workshop facilitator. Her early career was spent in market research, and she later changed tracks to become a therapist. Anjana is the founder of Right Thought, a company that helps educate, empower, and enrich lives through the written word. She works with both clients and clinicians who wish to get acquainted with the power of therapeutic writing, and presents workshops regularly. And she serves on the board of the National Federation, or International now, Federation for Poetry Therapy. And she's also a very good friend of the National Association for Poetry Therapy. So welcome, Anjana. And then the other beautiful person I have here is David Kopacz. And did I kill it, Dave?
Oh, that's good. That's good.
And this is what we have about him. It was said of Thoreau that a poet novelist's work is his life. So David ascribes to this philosophy that any work is life's work and should be entered into with one's whole being. And I can agree, yes, totally there with you. This represents a holistic and integrative philosophy applied to all life endeavors, whether clinical, leadership, or artistic. He currently works as a psychiatrist in primary care mental health integration at the Seattle division of Puget Sound.
Oh, Puget Sound, yes, at the VA.
At the veterans. Oh, wow. So you are really a dream come true for anyone. A psychiatrist who does this. I'm going to invite people to go to his website and read the rest. He has books that he has published. He offers retreats on different grounds from the work that people do to the outer work that they do to the inner work, or a combination of both. So I'm trusting that the audience is going to go to both Anjana and David's website and really read more in depth about the work they do. But today, so welcome. That was a lot.
Thank you.
All right. Let's start with the concept or the reality of racial trauma and the multiple components. And well, first, what is racial trauma in your understanding before we go any further? How, if the audience is kind of saying, what, racial trauma, what is that? What will you say?
Would you like to start?
Let David start.
Oh, you're gonna let me start. Okay, I was gonna let you start. Well, I suppose if we looked at just the components of the word, it would be a trauma that revolves around race, whether that's a trauma that's inflicted because of race or a trauma that's experienced because of race. I think in the United States today, it's hard to not have some idea and exposure to racial trauma and the idea of racial trauma.
Yeah,
I think it's also historical. You know, there's a very historical element to it as well as a contemporary element.
Right.
And to give it, I run a partial hospitalization program, and so we're having a lot of conversations about race right now. So one of the things that a patient just said to me today is they feel like they're being obliterated because of who they are. Yeah. Like, I am not accepted. I am not wanted.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like, you know, very visceral. She just put it out there that this is how I feel. That I'm being pushed away. I'm just not considered human. And why should I have to say I'm African American? I want to be able to say I'm American. That's what. So why should race enter this? You know?
Right, and it's like, so when we enter that the conversation on racial trauma, we think about what it means for people to be in constant, what we call a hypersocial social arouse, like just your color creates a sense of you not belonging to an or not just not belonging, but being in danger. Like I have brown and black clients who are telling me that they're afraid to go to a park. Right now, because of the pandemic, I'm encouraging people, go to nature. We have to keep the social distancing. And for a Caucasian person, that's not a problem. You go in nature, but the person whose color is an alarm button that triggers police brutality, that's very difficult. So what are some of the things, like when you hear someone being, you know, psychosocially triggered, what are some of the things, what did you respond to that person, Anjana?
Well, couple of things I want to bring up. One is I pointed out that it is easy to have this conversation now. I mean, we've run this program for years, but this whole movement has given language to this issue, has given validity to this issue. And so for the first time, people are bringing it up in a group, and it is uncomfortable, but it is being voiced. And people are supporting each other, and they are aware, like they were Caucasians, they were African Americans, and they say, we know, we can't presume to know what you're going through, but we're here to support. And so we had a conversation, and it didn't necessarily reach a resolution. But I think what I witnessed, like that, this was for the first time that they were able to express themselves honestly and not worry about what other people were thinking. So I think that's one stride ahead than what I have seen. I also gave poems, which are like regular templates, but for the first time, they started using the word, I'm a Black woman. I've never had poems like that. They would always have some other identity come up. So I feel like a conversation has opened up, you know.
Yeah. So it's opening up new venues for people to express themselves that you didn't see it before.
No.
That's a positive outcome of a terrible time.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
and I think that's what Alice Walker is kind of inviting us to look at that the beauty in the furious dance that we need to take. Any thoughts about this, Dave?
Yeah, I think, so I'm not a veteran myself, but I work with veterans exclusively in my clinical work. And the military has a kind of a checkered past as far as racial tolerance. There's a lot of racism that I've heard for years from different clients, veterans I've worked with. And I think in the past, when we thought about trauma, like about post-traumatic stress, clinically, sometimes we would miss a lot of suffering, because for post-traumatic stress disorder to be diagnosed, somebody has to have a direct life-threatening experience. And so, I was kind of curious. I would work with a lot of people who felt traumatized. Their nervous systems felt traumatized just from the interaction with them. But based on the diagnostic criteria, it would be difficult sometimes to come up with, but what was a trauma? Were you in combat? Did somebody get killed in front of you? That type of thing. And so one of the things I've been shifting toward more is the idea of moral injury. And moral injury comes out of looking at combat veterans a lot who were forced to do something as part of their duty that went against their morals. And I think a lot of the racism that people talk about, the veterans talk about that I work with, that happened in the military service was this kind of moral injury, where the command structure betrayed them, where the people in power who were supposed to be people they could go to or look up to betrayed them and did not support them. And I think this happens a lot with military sexual trauma as well, where women describe going to a superior officer and reporting something and having it being dismissed.
Yes.
So it's this kind of systemic racism that's within the military that's got a bad history. On the one hand, there can be this incredible camaraderie that people accept each other in the service as brothers and sisters, but there's also a terrible history of racism and sexual assault as well, sexual trauma.
And in that regard, I know that one of your offerings is along the lines of creating cultural transformations. So in that, with the VA, what are some of the work that you are doing now that you can say is pointing the institution in the direction of a new culture, a transformed culture of understanding and inclusivity? If that, I don't know if I'm putting a lot on you with that question, but
it's a good question. I would say, in general, my work as a holistic doctor is to look at spiritual, cultural, contexts, familial contexts, historical contexts. So in that sense, I think I've always been open to this perspective. Formally, the Office of Patient-Centered Care and Cultural Transformation, it's a national VA office, and a number of people really are stepping up and saying part of whole health, which is what we're trying to promote at the VA, depends on social equity. And we can't have whole health in an individual if there's not whole health in a society, and there's not whole health in a culture. And so a number of people that have broken into a subgroup to specifically work on this issue and to feed back to our whole national office of how can we, as we're talking about self-care and holistic care, how can we include an awareness of racial trauma as well and social inequities. Don Berwick has, instead of calling it social disparities, has started calling it moral disparities in healthcare, and really challenging the entire healthcare system to really think deep to the core of its structure and belief system, and to change that.
And that the change really has to start at that level, at the big system level. So from the perspective of the person who's working more, so here is the structural level is up here. There is a structure that holds this culture that you're trying to change. And I see you as the holistic practitioner, as someone who's in the middle here, and then there is the people in the trenches doing the work. So how is he, for the two of you actually, because I think both of you work in institutions, and I think that's how I see it. So how is it to be in that middle ground, seeing the need? What are some of the things that help you navigate both spectrums of the structure? The top structure that says, this is what's gonna happen here, and the people on the trenches that are saying, please take the boot off our neck, let us breathe.
Again, I'll let David go.
Okay.
How do you find
so
that kind of work?
Yeah.
Like, how do you use the person? Like,
Yeah. So there's a dialogue going on amongst physicians, and I think professionals both, of like, is this something we should be involved in? Like this whole idea of like, stay in your lane.
right.
And I think some of this depends on our identity, our self-identity. Do we define ourselves as technicians who are doing a very narrow evidence-based therapy approach within the four walls, staying within, very narrow within our scope of practice? Or are we professionals? And as professionals, do we have a higher calling? I think this is what Don Berwick is saying, is this is actually a moral issue. This isn't just, something for social medicine or sociologists to look at, or public health people. This is something that every single person on the front line should be dealing with.
Almost like the Dharma, right? Like this is your Dharma. This is your calling.
So I've really looked at this idea of like a lot of what's happened in medicine is a deprofessionalization, that doctors have become so busy, they're like glued to their computers, they're just like entering data all the time and following protocols. They've become protocol managers a lot of times instead of human clinicians, instead of healers. So I think part of this, to make this shift, we need to support everyone to identify, with this identity as a professional. I mean, what the word professional, you look at what it breaks down into, and it's someone who professes, someone who speaks out publicly is a professional. And so when we're told, stay in your lane, keep glued to your computer and just do your work there, that is actually a dereliction of duty. We're not being professionals anymore. And, that can be manipulated in society. Not only is it disempowering, but then it opens you up to manipulation. If you're saying, I'm just doing my job, I'm not responsible, I'm just doing my job.
That's a great way to look at it. So my problem is I have no lane. And when a person, so the place that I work at, it's a mental health institution. And I think the fact that they are in a hospital sometimes helps the people. That hospital almost acts as my co-facilitator and co-therapist. So I'm able to go a lot faster and deeper in terms of the questions we ask, or, because people have this feeling of safety. So I have used my institution in that way. The disadvantage is once I've set foot here, now all my needs are going to be met, and that sometimes is a struggle. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but insurance plays a huge role in the kind of services you get. And our group bonds really well, and they talk to each other. They get an experience like they've never gotten before. And then they start asking, well, where are you going after here? And they come and ask me, well, why can't I go there? I'm like, your insurance is not accepted there. And so I feel like that's an inequality that really needs to be addressed, because people have a need. People want that, they're willing to accept treatment, but I say, no, you can't go there. And you can't, out of pocket is too expensive. So there is a lot of denial of services based on their economic status and the insurance they have. So that's what I feel difficult to navigate. And that creates a structure, at least in my work, as to what kind of services will they be provided after this.
So then how do you, once you see yourself up against those situations that you're describing, and that the two of you are you have built yourselves with all these tools that are effective and that make the transformation possible, how do you use yourselves as an instrument for change in a day-to-day? Think about when you are faced with difficulty, with the reality of the structure, the system of insurance, even the public transportation, who gets there at what time. What do you do to create the connections that you want to create with the?
I think what you said about this being a calling and a dharma is absolutely true. Otherwise it'd be burnt out and disappointed and, said, look at the state of this world. But the resilience what we're talking about is really what we tap into. And I feel that the community, when there is less income, somehow the community is stronger. And people kind of help each other out. And a couple of things we do is we're like a small team of therapists, but we make use of self to say, well, we are receiving you right now. And we make sure that we are, create an atmosphere of safety and where they're able to talk and kind of give them, sometimes they come for the first time to therapy or such, an institution. And then connecting them to resources that are informal. Because of COVID, that's been another challenge because a lot of places are closed. So these are like really challenging times. And it is difficult to strike a balance. But I think like we used to have an alumni group so people could come and meet and continue that connection and get socialized and get therapy. That has also been shut down because of COVID. So we're really focusing on, other techniques, like we talk about writing, creating safety boxes, and that's what we're getting very creative right now. We're forced to get creative.
Were you gonna add something to that then?
Sure. I think so. That idea of the therapeutic use of the self, and the idea of trauma and dehumanization. I've been really, interested in the idea of dehumanization for a long time. We know that studies of medical students show that they lose idealism as they go through practice. We know that there's epidemic rates of burnout and compassion fatigue and all these different terms, and even moral injury. They're starting to look at doctors and healthcare professionals. Is it moral injury that you have been trained to be a healer and then you're employed to be a technician and a clerk and a manager? So in order to use yourself therapeutically, you have to realize, I think, that there's a constant pressure of dehumanization in many institutions throughout not just healthcare, but healthcare as well as many other institutions that want to treat you as somebody who's in a narrow identity and role rather than somebody who's a moral agent. And part of being a professional is to be a moral agent. So I think for myself, I've constantly worked, I wrote a whole book called Rehumanizing Medicine to try and think, how can you develop this, I called it a counter curriculum. How can you develop a counter curriculum of rehumanization to counter the constant pressure of dehumanization? And there's an interesting quote by a psychoanalyst named Stoller, who said that in order to dehumanize another, you have to dehumanize yourself first. And so this is a relationship. The trauma and the dehumanization is affecting everybody within it. So I think in a sense, to stop this perpetuation, this cycle, you have to first kind of look at yourself and heal yourself in a way, almost like bring your own soul back into your daily practice, so that you can have that perspective as a moral agent and as a professional.
Right, because I think what I was trying to go with that is that, the people who are at the bottom, they are contracted. And sometimes the people in the middle also contract. And then there is no encountering of the people who can make a change by being in a relationship, right? So I'm so glad, Dave, that you're bringing us back to the use of the self, because, and then my question, what are some creative ways that you have found to both expand, bring yourselves into an expansive way of being, and so you can offer it to others? Like, what are some of the specific offerings that you on a daily basis you bring to the workplace? What are some of the creative ways specifically in which first you expand yourself and then you help others expand?
No, Anjana, you're going to talk about poetry. I'm hoping so. I really want to hear you talk about poetry.
I was almost going to say PT.
So I have to be honest and say that I don't really expand myself, but I do pick on things that delight me. And I bring that to the group and we get delighted together. And so I don't see myself as separate from them. And for me, it's like just, this is a group of people with different experiences. And it resonates with me and it resonates with them as well. Like this, today we did a very simple exercise where it's called fortune cookie. And you take two styrofoam cups, put them on top of each other. That's a cookie. And then each of the patients, we had like about 20 patients, they write down a wish or a desire for someone else and put it in each cup. You write your name on the cup and you decorate the cup with a symbol of recovery and stuff like that. And then at the end, they just break open that cookie and there's all these good wishes inside it. And they leave feeling so fulfilled. Some cry, some say, this is wonderful, I'm just gonna keep this. And so the material we use is very accessible. This is not something that they can't afford or, and it's easily available. So I think and then we have the $5 dates. That's from Julia Cameron. How are you going to take yourself out on a date? So very accessible, delightful things that you can do by yourself in the current circumstances. And I think our brain loves novelty, it loves a challenge. And so we keep asking people, how did you challenge yourself to move? So it's kind of more developing internal resources using delight and humor. People say, I never thought I could laugh, but you know, everybody is laughing. And so that I think I focus more on creating an experience with using the very accessible material.
Yeah, and I think to develop, in order to meet a person at wherever and what dimension or domain, human domain it is that's most important to them, you have to develop that to some extent in yourself in a rudimentary way. Otherwise, you just ignore it. If you don't think spirituality is important and you've never had a spiritual experience, you're going to sort of wall off that entire realm of the person you're working with.
Right.
Similarly, with creativity, if you don't engage in creative work yourself, you're not going to really give any value to that. So with our whole health model, the VA, Office Patient-Centered Care, and Cultural Transformation, our whole health model, it's a circle with 8 different domains that go around that are essentially like a mind, body, spirit approach to a human being. And what we try to do is engage the person in what they're interested in. Instead of telling them what to do, you should do this to be healthy, we say, what is it that's in your heart that you want to do? And then we'll help support that. And we think if you bring out what's in your heart into your life, that will create health for you.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And also, I'm picturing the individual who has contracted, you know, and to have that acknowledgement that I see something. There is a variety of things that you can choose, but I know there is something here for you. So the use of the self is also reassuring in that aspect. That you are saying, I see you. I'm not going to tell you what you're going to get from here, but I know there is something here for you. And that's part of the expansiveness of that. And also the two-way street of relationships, of connectivity. That makes so much sense. What other things? In terms of facilitating things that you know, because I think, Dave, what you were saying, that in order for us to know or to offer something to someone, we have to experience it somehow. I think that's where genuineness in doing the soul work that we are committing to do comes from that. Like, we have to touch soul first.
Yeah, so here's a good example. I lived in New Zealand for 3.5 years, and I came back to the United States, got a job at the VA, and was going through a degree of reverse culture shock. And all day long, I would sit and listen to veterans come in and say, I just don't get civilians. I just don't understand what their values are. I just despise them. I hate them. I don't have any respect for them. They don't think about other people. They only think about themselves. And then the veterans would say, you know, I'm home, but I don't feel home. And I'd be like, dang, you know, I feel kind of the same way. I mean, I don't mean to make those equivalent, but I felt a little bit of this sense of cultural displacement. And so I started to think about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, because when I was in New Zealand, I worked at a very progressive rehabilitation, psychiatric rehabilitation institute. And some of us had started talking about, man, Joseph Campbell's model of the hero's journey or the heroine's journey would be a great rehabilitation tool. You started here, you crossed a threshold, you went into an abyss, you had suffering, you learned some meaning from it, and you're trying to come back into society. You're trying to pick up and cross that return threshold back into society. So I developed a hero's journey class for veterans to use principles and ideas around acculturation and reverse culture shock, and also narrative, to look at this is a common story. This is a common story to be lost. Actually, in the hero's or heroine's journey, it's not a hero or heroine's journey if you're not lost at some point, you know, if you don't have some suffering. So it was a model and a story that contextualized suffering and gave it a place, rather than somebody being a victim who was damaged. They became somebody who was trying to find their inner heroism by, you know, taking these steps through suffering and embracing and integrating the suffering, rather than trying to medicate it away or you know, therapize it away.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you're just bringing us right into my what I was dreaming on us talking about vulnerability. You just pointed to it, right? That the hero or the heroine have to embrace their vulnerability in order to be able to even see a threshold and go through. So go from the breakdown into the breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
So say more about vulnerability and.
Anjana, why don't you start some and then.
No, what you were saying was so interesting to me, and that's really post-traumatic growth that you were talking about, you know. And so the vulnerability, I think, I'm just talking in terms of the people who are in my group right now. I'm sure like they're fresh in my mind, but we've had people from 18 and 19 to people in their 60s. And each one is at a different stage in their journey, but somehow everybody has gone through that phase and have come up on the other side. And I think they kind of facilitate each other's journey. So the younger ones are told, I wish I had your wisdom. You know, I'm in my 60s. I should have gotten help earlier. You're doing a great job. And, you know, so they're very, they almost role model for each other. And they agreed to be vulnerable because they can see that it's going to assist someone else. They're not being vulnerable in a vacuum. They're not just saying, so they're making meaning of their experiences and of their pain. And if that meaning is given, then it's easier to be vulnerable and say, well, this is, you know, this is what happened to me. And they can see the impact right away. And people have undergone so many changes. They've gone home and had a conversation with their parents or their spouse or families based on the feedback they got in groups. So it's almost like a chain of vulnerability that starts. You know, people are open to discussing what they went through and what their experiences were. So I think there's a lot of wisdom within the group. And this shared vulnerability kind of encourages each other. And so today was very vulnerable for me because they asked me questions about race and my race and their race. And so that was use of self and being vulnerable and going through my own journey along with them. So today was a very different group, and I was smiling because I knew I had this in the evening. So that was, and so vulnerability, even from me, I think is important for them to see that, hey, everybody goes through this. And I think it's like a door that opens and you walk through it. And the initial hesitancy is there, but people are, once they know the meaning, the arc that you were talking about, David, is that, you know, I go into the abyss and I'm climbing out and everybody has to do it. And that helps with situating that experience and knowing what to do with it.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that the heroine or the hero, they both have to take the journey and then come back and be received. They leave a community and they must come back to a community. So do you, the two of you, see the community that is built in the settings where you work as that supported community, perhaps even more than the family community? What do you see?
I think with veterans, definitely they will say other veterans can understand them better than their own family, because they have been acculturated into this sort of mindset, and they come back and they no longer connect to the old culture. So I think veteran to veteran, you know, just like Anjana was talking about, of like the vulnerability of sharing with others in order to help. We see that as well, of trying to get veteran to veteran support as very important. But as the VA, we don't want people just to form groups, because in the past, you know, there'd been therapy groups, PTSD groups that would run for decades within the VA. And what we want people to do is not to be a permanent patient or permanent victim, but eventually to be able to form that community out in the world. So I think it's transitional, what we're trying to do, in a way to try and make ourselves obsolete. It's also like rehabilitation in a sense. You know, rehabilitation isn't about just having everybody in this group indefinitely, but having people come in, connect to something, get some skills, and then to take that out and to be able to create that in their community. I have here's a great story from our whole health class. So we had a big tough guy who just moved to the area, you know, former Marine. And we talked about relationships and how relationships are healthy. They support health in all these different ways. And so he had just moved to a new apartment, and he, you know, got up early Sunday morning. He was like, oh, in that class, they talked about how important relationships were, but I don't know anyone here. He said, well, I can just get dressed up and I'll sit in the lobby. So he gets dressed up, suit and, you know, tie and everything, sits in the lobby, and some people come by and they say, hey, you look like you're all dressed up for church. And he said, well, yeah, I'm dressed up, but I just moved here. I don't know anyone. You know, I don't know any churches. And they said, well, why don't you come with us? We're going at 11 to church. And he's like, oh, that'd be great. And so he's sitting there, you know, kind of smiling. And another group comes up to him and say, hey, you look like you're all dressed up and ready to go somewhere. And he said, oh, yeah, you know, I'm going to church at 11 with some new friends I just met. I just moved here. And they said, well, why don't you come with us to 9 o'clock and breakfast, and we'll get you back in time for 11 with your other group. And so this guy came back after just one class, and he said, I don't know, I just put myself out there, and all of a sudden I was invited to 2 different churches, and I had 2 different new groups of friends, and I felt great.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story, and the power of action, right? That's it. That transformation cannot be static. It has to be done through action, through movement, and by that person getting up and getting change and putting himself out there. That's a very excellent story to bring these points together.
I think technology is also helping a lot with that. Like our patients have created a Facebook page, which is by invitation only, and they have, sometimes they put something out there saying, I'm going to Starbucks, does anyone want to come? And then people just come there. So they are continuing, and I agree with David, like we don't want them to be dependent on the institution, but sometimes patients tell me, even after they've completed the program, said, I was so upset yesterday, I just drove in and sat in the parking lot for some time, and I felt comforted, and then I went away. You know, so it does have a place, you know, like that they felt understood, supported, not judged, and that doesn't happen outside as much with mental illness. So they do see it as a safe space, but we're trying to do the same thing. Is that, you know, you have to make your own groups and try to connect. So they do it through technology. I know that they're running the Zoom meetings right now with the alumni group is doing that on their own now.
So we have to close here, but I don't want to close without asking you, if you were to give just one resource to therapists who are watching this, in terms of what we were describing before, the importance of using the self to advance the therapeutic progress and to create transformation, the self as an agent of change, and as, you know, as what we have, we are the raw material. What is one suggestion you will give to a
And
therapist?
it's David, and David is going to go now.
Okay, all right. Well, there's a great VA website, VA Whole Health, and it's an open site. It's designed for veterans, but it's kind of an open access site, and people can do a personal health inventory, which goes through these 8 different kind of mind, body, spirit dimensions to look at where you are now, where you want to be, looking at what's important to you. And then there's tons of resources for like biofeedback, meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, all these different things, tons of health promotion videos. I mean, you could spend hours looking at this VA Whole Health website. So I think that's a really big website. And the beauty about Whole Health is it's the same thing for staff as well as for patients.
Mhm.
It's not diagnosis specific. Everyone's a human being. Everyone can work to build their health. So it's the same model that we use when we're talking to staff about staff wellness and self-care and burnout as we use with veterans.
Yes, it's putting that oxygen mask first.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we all share in our groups, you know, if we have a student or, you know, doctor, nurse, whoever it is, everybody shares in the group because everyone's working on something in their health.
Right.
And it's not just some people sitting back as these omniscient, you know, omnipotent
Right.
observers.
So it's the true practice of common humanity, the true embracing of that.
True.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And
So I don't have a resource, but I do think that supervision is really, really, really important. And it's been useful for me. It prevents burnout and really somewhere where I can bounce ideas and get more information from. So I think those professional groups are really a source of, at least for me, they're like a nourishment. This one is going to be, it sparked so many ideas. So I think that is one thing that should be done, that if you want to be in this field and continue working and thriving.
so thank you so much, David and Anjana. And I will put a link below with a way to learn more about their work and about how to access the information on whole health and other things. So please check at the bottom, and you will see very clear links to how to learn more about David Kopacz and Anjana Deshpande's work. And thank you both for being here with me tonight.